Picture this. You're sitting in a dark closet by candlelight. There's only room for a small table and a chair. On the table is the candle and a large mirror tilted so you can't see yourself. But that doesn't mean you don't see anything. Welcome to Psychomanteum. I'm Karin Shah. Here we venture into the other side of the mirror. Paranormal mysteries, scary stories, and all things supernatural. If that sounds like your jam, and if you like what you hear, please drop a like so we can grow. Now, gather round, everyone. After I got my license at 16, I was dying to take a long drive. Unfortunately, I had to work most of the day, and as a new young driver, I wasn't allowed to drive after 9 p.m. Since I didn't get out of work until 7, I'd given up on driving that day, until my best friend Moira had an idea. Her brother Sam operated an old house about 45 minutes away as a place for people to do paranormal investigations. It wasn't exactly the Villisca Axe murder house or anything, but it had a creepy history, and Moira said people had documented EVPs and other phenomena. Sam had it rented out for the rest of the summer, but he'd complained to his sister that it was available that night. She suggested we go there and investigate all night. That sounded like spooky fun, and I didn't have to work the next day until 3, so she texted her brother and made the arrangements. My parents didn't love the idea, but after some next-level pleading, they agreed to let me go. Moira and I got on the road immediately, only stopping to get gas and snacks. It was a beautiful summer evening in western New York. The crickets and frogs were loud enough to be heard over the engine of my 20-year-old Civic, but we soon drowned them out, singing to the radio at the top of our lungs while the sun dropped lower in the bright blue sky. As the sun set ahead of us in a vivid display of orange and purple, pink and blue, a tiny sliver of moon and a few stars adding to the beauty of the evening, we pulled onto the gravel driveway and saw the house. To say the house was creepy was the understatement of the century. Moira had read some of her brother's marketing materials to me to get me excited, and they had called the house Second Empire style. The house had been built in 1850, but I would have believed you if you said it was the set of a classic horror movie. It had the kind of roof that was flat on top and sloped down a little on the sides to encompass the attic. You know what I mean, like the Addams Family house. There was a front porch that wrapped the house and arches over the narrow windows. The only thing it lacked was a turret. Moira's info said some rich guy had built it, but she refused to go into any more detail since she said her brother told the story better and he was meeting us there. Sure enough, there was another car in the driveway, and as I pulled the car up and parked, Sam strode out of the front door and gave us a big wave. He trotted down the wide front steps and hugged his sister and me. He seemed really pumped about his new enterprise and kind of shoved us ahead of him up the stairs and into the open front door, talking the whole way. He told us the house had been built by some guy who got rich through shipping freight along the Erie Canal. But that, as he told it, was the guy's last good fortune. Not long after he and his family moved into the house, he lost his wife and 3 children to tuberculosis. He remarried a few years later, only to lose that wife during childbirth and the surviving child at the age of 5 in a carriage accident. When the Civil War started, he and his brother signed up to fight for the Union, but only he came home. Now alone in the big house, he tried to bury himself in his business, but war and the railroads bled his businesses dry. He died at 50 of a heart attack, but Sam said people who knew him claimed it was really from a broken heart. From what I could see from the entry, the house was furnished, but sparsely. Sam said they were adding authentic-looking pieces as they found them. Straight ahead, the foyer led to the back of the house with the stairs along the wall on one side. Open doors on either side of the foyer displayed what Sam called the formal parlor, on the right and the day room on the left. Sam led us through the house, telling us the, quote, claims in each area. The former parlor held a rolled-arm sofa and a coffee table, as well as a couple wingback chairs, all centered on an elaborate, if worn, fireplace. Here, he said, people claimed to see a woman in white. Moira and I shared a look at that. A little shiver went up my spine. It was almost completely dark outside now, and what seemed like a fun idea in the light of day was now starting to creep me out. Still, I laughed it off as Sam continued the tour. The day room had been run as a doctor's office in the 1920s and had various old-timey doctor's tools scattered about on a rickety exam table. Both the front rooms had pocket doors to rooms behind them, a dining room behind the day room, and a study behind the parlor. A kitchen, butler's pantry, and mudroom spanned the back of the house. Upstairs were 5 large bedrooms and a door to the attic. The attic held several cramped rooms that once belonged to servants, and a tiny back staircase that went down to each floor and opened into the kitchen. We even went into the basement, although there wasn't much to see down there, just stone walls, a dirt floor, and an area that must have been used to preserve food, because there were still some glass mason jars on the shelves filled with who knows what. Every room had a claim: disembodied voices and music, the feeling of being watched, shadow figures, and in many places that same woman in white. With each claim, Moira and I shared a nervous smile or giggle. Oddly, the last thing he showed us was a small closet on the main floor. A sign had been posted over the door. I had never heard the word, and I actually had to sound it out like a little kid. The Psychomanteum? Sam laughed.
You got it.
He reached in and pulled down the light switch so we could see inside. All that was in there was a small table and a chair. On the table was a large mirror tilted up about 45 degrees and a candle.
The mirror's tilted so you can't see yourself. All you do is light the candle and stare into the mirror.
And then what? I asked.
Just keep looking until you see something. It's like scrying.
Moira and I shared another uneasy look. After he showed us that, he told us to make ourselves comfortable in the parlor. He said the beds were clean and we were welcome to sleep in them if we wanted, but we doubted we'd sleep. Then he went around with a flashlight and turned off all the lights. After that, he went to the front door.
Have fun!
Wait, said Moira. You're not staying? He shook his head.
Sorry, Ellie's sick, so it's all hands on deck at home right now.
Moira and I looked at each other. We didn't know Sam was going to leave, but we could hardly chicken out now. I swallowed but put on a nervous smile as Sam got in his car and drove away. There was nothing but woods around the house, and as the sound of Sam's car faded in the distance, we were alone in a haunted house. Moira poked me in the ribs and said we should get started. She shut the door. The last of the light had faded, and without Sam's flashlight, it was pitch black in the house. We hurriedly got out our phones and put on the flashlights. Before, with Sam here, the house had been creepy, but now the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I swung my phone around. Sure, there were things moving in the shadows. What should we do first? I asked. Moira suggested we start with some EVP questions in the parlor. Her brother had left some equipment for paranormal investigations. So she picked up the voice recorder and started a session. We both watched a lot of ghost hunting shows, so she started the tape, said the location and who was there, and put the recorder on the coffee table. We started asking questions and waiting 30 or so seconds in between to allow for answers. Is there anyone there? What is your name? How did you die? The usual. Then Moira stopped the recording, and we listened. Nothing. For the next 2 hours, we walked around listening, trying to record EVPs, asking for knocks, We even tried the spirit box. That's a radio that sweeps very quickly across frequencies. Paranormal investigators believe spirits can manipulate the static to say things. Unfortunately, all of our attempts yielded nothing. Finally, we decided to take a break and eat our snacks. After the break, Moira suggested trying the Psychomanteum. I was a little scared to be on my own, but after hours of investigating and nothing happening, I'd started to get used to the creepy house, so I agreed. We found some paper and drew names out of an old hat. I lost, or won, depending on how you look at it, and my name was pulled from the hat. I went into the Psychomanteum and closed the door. There were matches beside the candle, and I lit it and turned off my flashlight. It was super quiet in the closet. So quiet, I could hear not just my breathing and my heartbeat, but that kind of hum you get when your ears are trying to pick up on sounds that aren't there. The glass in the mirror reflected the light of the candle flickering off the yellowed walls of the closet. I stared into the glass, my eyes straining to make something out of nothing. After several minutes of staring, I slumped back, letting my eyes relax, wondering how long I had to do this. I yawned. I was starting to get sleepy. Earlier, we had brushed off the idea of sleeping on the four-poster beds upstairs, but now the idea of lying down on a soft mattress sounded like a good idea. Several more minutes passed, and I was thinking of getting up and calling it quits when I realized I was actually hearing something. Not just hearing something, but my name, Chris. At first, I thought Moira was calling me, but the voice wasn't coming from the other side of the door. It seemed to be coming from inside the closet. Chris, the voice called again. I looked around me and then into the mirror. Reflected there was a woman. Like the reports, she was wearing white, but all the stories said she wore an elegant 19th century evening gown, her hair up in a bun, and a serene look on her face. The woman in the mirror had long dark hair streaming down to her shoulders. Her eyes were black pits, and she smiled as she said my name. But it wasn't a friendly smile. Her smile was the stuff of nightmares. It seemed to say, "You're at my mercy now." I screamed and spun around to face her, but there was no one there. My breath snagged in my throat as I saw the empty closet behind me. My heart was slamming against my chest, my pulse racing in my ears. I stood to escape the closet and almost knocked over the candle. I managed to right it, and my gaze fell on the mirror again, and she was still there. I screamed again, and the door to the closet flew open. What? Moira yelled. I could only wave a shaking hand at the mirror and stammer, "Woman in white." Moira glanced at the mirror. Shoot, there's nothing there now. I blew out the candle and buzzed around the parlor, grabbing my things, got my bags from the foyer and scrabbled at the doorknob, ripping the front door open and dashing down the stairs. Moira followed me, yelling at me to wait and asking again what I had seen. I ignored her and ran to my car, cold tears running down my cheeks as I unlocked the car and jumped inside, locking it behind me. A knock at my window made me flinch. "Chris, let me in." I unlocked the other doors and Moira got in. "Are you okay? What did you see?" I managed to describe what I saw, the whole time reliving the horrible terror I felt at the black holes where her eyes should be and her evil smile. "Wow," said Moira. "I wish I'd seen it." "No," I shook my head so hard my cheeks vibrated. "You wouldn't want to see it." Moira spent the next hour trying to coax me back into the house, but I refused to go. I felt bad about cutting our night short, but there was no way in hell I was going back to that house. However, now we had another problem. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't drive again until 5 a.m. Moira and I talked for a while, played games, and scrolled through our phones for the rest of the night. At 5 a.m., I drove us back to our house, and we crashed in my room. I wish I could say that was the end of the story, but it was only the beginning. The dark figure that stood over me in my bed reached down. Its fingernails were more like claws, and I knew if it touched me, it would hurt me. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make more than a squeak. Those claw-like hands came closer, every movement achingly slow but inexorable. They came closer and closer. I could already imagine the slice of those nails in my skin. I tried again to scream, to call for help. Just as the hands reached my arms, I woke up with a start, my heart racing, clammy with sweat. A dream. It was only a dream. But as I saw my friend Moira sleeping on my futon across the room, last night's events rushed back. In the bright light of morning, I laughed at myself for being so scared at the house. I'd been tired and primed to be scared. It was no wonder I'd imagined the sinister-looking woman in the mirror. I thought I saw something. That was what scared me so much. I ran out of the house like a little kid, thinking the shadow of a stuffy on a chair was a monster. I'd gone there to ghost hunt, after all. Imagination or not, I should have been excited, not terrified. I was so embarrassed. I'd ruined our night with my childish panic. Moira must be so angry. I shook my head and glanced at the clock. Crap! I thought it was morning, but it was almost 2 p.m. already. I was surprised my mom hadn't woken me. I had work at 3. I woke Moira and practically begged her forgiveness as I grabbed my robe. She told me it was okay and shoved me toward the door, knowing I had to start getting ready. I jumped in the shower and got ready in record time. I threw my wet hair into a ponytail, grabbed my work apron, and headed to the door. Moira lived a block away, so she walked out with me on her way home. My battered Civic was in the driveway, and I stretched up to adjust the mirrors, then turned on the car and put my car in reverse. My backup camera being so old and tiny it was practically useless, I glanced up at the rearview mirror to back out, and for just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a face, and then it was gone. Heart pounding, I slammed the car into park and scanned the back seat. Naturally, there was nobody there, and I scoffed at my own nerves. I was too old to be imagining things like this. I glanced at the clock on the dash, and if I didn't get my butt in gear, I would be late. That night, after work, I texted Moira, wanting to apologize again, but she just laughed at me. Tired after being up most of the night and working my shift, I decided to scroll through social media for a while and go to bed early. As I doom-scrolled, a video came on about Moira's brother's haunted house. I stared at it, again noticing the classic haunted house look, and had to laugh. Sam had had someone dress up like a lady in white and stand in the window. I shook my head, texting Moira about it. "What do you mean?" she answered. I texted, "You know, the woman in the window?" "Chris, there is no woman in the window," she replied. I laughed and rolled my eyes at her messing with me and flipped back to the video, but the woman was gone. I watched the video again and again, but Moira hadn't been lying to me. There was no woman in the window. I growled at myself and threw my phone on the bed. I really had to get a grip. First, I was imagining things in mirrors, and now in my phone. I really needed a good night's sleep. Exhausted, it didn't take me more than a few minutes to fall asleep. I don't know how long I slept, but at some point, something woke me. I had an overwhelming sense of an evil presence in my room. I didn't want to look. For a heartbeat, I squeezed my eyes even tighter, but it was no use. I had to know if something was there. I opened my eyes, and to my horror, standing above me, just like my earlier dream, was the woman from the mirror. My blood felt like shards of ice in my veins. This time I knew I wasn't dreaming, but still I couldn't move. She leaned forward, her long black hair swinging toward me. Those black pits where her eyes should be seemed to pierce through me, pinning me in place. Terror raced through me. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I tried to scream. She raised her clawed finger in front of her lips in a mockery of a shushing movement. I struggled to move, to yell for help, to tell her to stay away. She smiled as she had before, that evil, malevolent smile that said she was going to hurt me. Then she lunged forward, crawling on top of me on the bed. The small amount of light in the room should have made it impossible to see her face, but her skin was so pale I could see her mouth moving as if she was speaking, the moment stretched out like wet rope. Tears collected at the corners of my eyes, my vision blurred, and she disappeared. It took me a few seconds to realize she was gone. I sagged into the mattress. My muscles had been so tight that now they ached. I was panting so heavily it sounded more like sobbing in the silence of the room. I lay there too scared and wrung out to move. Several minutes later, I was able to turn over and see the time on my phone. It was 3 a.m. The paranormal shows called this the witching hour. Finally, I dragged myself out of bed, my joints rubbery with leftover adrenaline. It was no use trying to go back to sleep until I cleared my mind. My mind tumbled through the experience, fighting to shape it into reality. I knew I'd probably just had sleep paralysis anyway. It was practically textbook. Being overtired, my body still locked from sleep and my brain still half dreaming, seeing, quote, the hag. Admittedly, the woman I'd seen was younger than what people usually saw, but people didn't always see the crone. Sometimes they saw animals or the Hat Man. I must have seen that woman somewhere in a horror movie or someplace, and my brain filled her in last night and again tonight. I got myself a drink in the kitchen and went back to bed, only to jolt awake again, this time from my mother yelling, "Hunter Slayton, what did you do?" Gathering that my 12-year-old brother was in hot water, I thought about trying to go back to sleep, but the middle of the night episode still lingered, and I was curious about what Hunt had done to make my usually pretty chill mom so upset. I wandered out of my room and into the kitchen. Every cabinet in the kitchen hung open, as well as the refrigerator. Items from the fridge had been tipped over onto the floor, and words had been scrawled on the wall in something red. It was hard for a minute to make out the words because they were so sloppy, but finally I realized it said, "I know you saw." It looked like blood, but my rational brain said was probably the ketchup lying in a pool of sauce in the middle of the floor. "What's going on?" My brother's drowsy voice came from the direction of his room, and he padded into view, rubbing his eye with his knuckle. My mom stiffened further and gestured at the mess. "You know what's going on. This isn't funny. You can forget playing that horror game you love, and no more scary movies. You are too old for this stuff." My brother had been a bit of a pain in the butt when he was little, making messes and causing trouble, but he'd pretty much grown out of it. He stared at the mess and shook his head. "I didn't do this, Mom." His voice was steady and sure. I instinctively knew he was telling the truth. Besides, he'd clearly just woken up, and the kitchen hadn't looked like this when I'd gotten a drink in the wee hours of the morning. My mom seemed to believe him, too, because she seemed to deflate. We all stared at each other as we tried to make sense of this. My mom knew she hadn't done it. I never caused trouble, and my dad had left yesterday on a business trip. It was only the 3 of us in the house. Still, Someone had to have done it. Immediately, my mom said, "Check the windows." My brother and I hurried to do that while my mom rushed to check the front and back doors. We all met back in the kitchen a minute later. My brother shook his head at us, making it clear the windows he checked were locked, and I did the same. My mom raked her hand through her hair, making it stand on end, but none of us were in the mood to find that funny. "We need to make sure no one is in the house," she said. My brother and I turned to start looking, but my mom grabbed our arms. "No, we'll go together. Do you have your phones?" We both nodded. "Be ready to dial 911 if there's an intruder." We searched the house from top to bottom. My hands shook the whole time, and all the while I was torn between wanting someone to be there and hoping no one was. I was terrified there was an intruder, of course. Of course I was. But I was equally terrified I knew exactly who, or rather, what, had made the mess and drawn on the walls. When we found the house empty, I couldn't deny it any longer, and as we started to clean the kitchen, I rummaged through my mind, trying to find the right words to tell my family I thought we had a ghost. At last, after everything was picked up and my mom was wiping the ketchup off the wall, I broke down and told her and Hunter what had happened the night I spent at Moira's brother's haunted house and the things that had been happening since. My family stood there silent for a second, and I spun through a million scenarios of how they might react. My brother just stared at me. My mom opened her mouth to speak. Her eyes were narrowed as if she were about to brush off the theory that we had a ghost. I saw her gaze dart over my brother and could almost see her considering how to handle this for him. It was most parents' go-to for young kids to immediately assure them there was no such thing as ghosts. And after all, this was the first inexplicable thing to happen. Still, there weren't exactly a lot of rational explanations for what had happened. Either one of us had done it, which we had already discounted. Someone had broken in and done it, or, as I had suggested, we had a ghost. Neither of the last two answers were reassuring for kids, and Hunter wasn't little anymore. My mom blew out a sigh so heavy her cheeks puffed out. There's no sign of forced entry, and neither of the doorbell cameras alerted. She pressed her lips together. "Are you sure you saw something, Chris?" I nodded. "I've been trying to talk myself out of this since I saw her a couple nights ago, but after this?" I waved at the now clean wall and shrugged. What else could it be? Hunter split a glance between the two of us. What should we do? My mom reached out and gently squeezed my shoulder. "Call Moira. Since Sam does paranormal investigations at that house, he must know how to fix this." Moira picked up immediately. "Why are you calling me?" We always texted. I quickly ran down what had happened. She thought I was making it up at first, but my mom took the phone and assured her everything I was saying was the truth. We hung up, and almost half an hour later, she texted to say Sam told her to bring me back to the house that night. It couldn't be earlier because he had a day job. He did have a paranormal group coming in that night, but they'd been more than happy to have me since I had documented activity around me. At least someone was happy about this. Anyway, I needed to get this handled as soon as possible, so I couldn't complain. Luckily, I didn't have to work that night, although I would have called in sick if I'd had to. The 2 days I'd been haunted were 2 days too many, and now my family was involved. We were all on edge all day, but finally it was time to leave. My mom decided to come with me this time, and my brother refused to stay home alone. Moira insisted on coming too, so the 4 of us arrived at the house just as the sun was setting. Sam was leaning against his car, and there were several people waiting on the front porch, loaded down with equipment. Sam made quick introductions as he let us in the house, but I barely paid attention. The only name I remembered was Sandy, a full-figured woman he called the lead investigator. We all went into the formal parlor on the right of the foyer and staircase. The room felt kind of crammed with the 4 of us, Sam and the 5 investigators. My mom thanked them for letting us come in on the night they'd reserved. Sam said Moira had told him some of what had happened, but he needed to know the whole story so he could help. I ran down the events that had happened 2 nights ago, and he said it sounded like I had an attachment. I'd been Googling this afternoon, so that wasn't news to me, and I asked what we could do about it. The investigators kind of started talking over each other at that, but Sandy waved them down and stepped forward. She explained that she'd had something similar happen to her when she first started investigating, and she'd found that usually the spirit was trying to communicate. Finding out the identity of the spirit and what it wanted, along with telling it it didn't have permission to follow me, usually cut the attachment. Then she repeated that part. Whatever you do, don't forget to tell it it can't follow you. I was happy to have a plan, but asked how I was supposed to find out who she was and what she wanted to tell me. After all, there had been many women in the house in its almost 200-year history, not to mention the servants of the people who'd owned the house in the early days. Sam suggested that since I had first contacted the ghost in the Psychomanteum, I should try that. I'm not going to lie, the idea of going back into the Psychomanteum filled me with dread. My palms immediately got sweaty. My mom said she could go in with me, but I shook my head. There really wasn't room for 2 people. I decided I'd leave the door open. All the lights were turned off. The sun had set outside, but there was still some light bleeding beneath and around the heavy drapes on the front and side windows. I went to the closet in the back corner of the room and opened the door. A shiver went down my spine at the sight of the table with the large rectangular mirror tilted against the wall on the back. It all looked extra creepy, cloaked in shadow as it was. I swallowed, but sat down in the chair and scanned the table in front of me for the small box of matches. I lit the long, skinny taper in the candlestick holder. The warm, flickering light was a relief, and I glanced out the door at the people crowded around the outside of the closet. My mom smiled at me. I started to tell her I didn't know how long this would take, but before the words could leave my lips, the door to the closet slammed shut. I screamed and jumped up. The breeze from the door blew out the candle. Now it was pitch black in the closet. I grabbed the glass doorknob and tried to turn it, but it wouldn't open. I felt my stomach drop. Someone rattled the knob on the other side. I could hear my mom's voice, the closest, so it must have been her. She yelled to me to unlock the door, but I told her I couldn't, that it was stuck. My hands burned from trying to force the faceted knob. I heard the sounds of my mom and the investigators arguing about who closed the door, and my mom demanding the key. They all denied slamming the door, and I had been looking at them at the time, and I hadn't seen anyone move, so I believed them. Sam said he didn't even have a key. The knob rattled some more, stopped for a long second, and then rattled again, harder, the frame shaking a little, so I thought maybe Sam was trying to open it now. There was a dull thud, maybe Sam trying to break it open, but these were old solid wood doors, and it barely moved. There was more bickering, but it was hard to make out individual words. Someone gave a shrill whistle, and the noise stopped. There was some quiet murmuring, and a second later my mom spoke again. Sam says he'll go get a screwdriver and take the door off its hinges, and Sandy says while he does that, you should go ahead and try to make contact with the ghost. That made sense. It was what I was in here for anyway. It took a minute for me to relight the candle because my hands were shaking like crazy. But finally I managed. It was a relief to have some light, but I'd been scared to do this before. Now I was terrified. I tried to slow my breathing, but the air was thick, and the already close walls of the closet seemed to close in more. I grabbed the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white, trying to calm myself. When nothing happened for several heartbeats, I made myself slump back into the chair and forced my gaze onto the mirror. I stared at the reflection of candlelight on a dingy wall for what seemed like an eternity, but I later suspected was only a couple minutes. Then something caught my eye, not in the mirror, but Beneath it, a cloud of white vapor. When it disappeared and then reappeared, I realized it was my own breath and that my hands were freezing. It was a balmy summer evening outside. The house was almost too warm. There was only one reason for such a drastic temperature change. I looked back into the mirror and saw the black, pit-like eyes I dreaded to see. The air caught in my lungs, feeling like a jagged icicle in my throat and chest. I wanted to rip my gaze away, to jump up and try the door again, but I knew it wouldn't open. She wouldn't let me go until she had gotten whatever she needed. As much as my brain screamed she was just evil and that all she wanted was to torment me, going through with the plan was the only hope I had to be free of her. My throat was so dry I could barely make a sound, but I managed to squeeze out, "Who are you?" Her lips moved in that pale, skeletal face, but no sound came out. My heart skipped and banged in my chest like a moth against a porch light. What was I going to do if I couldn't understand her? Would she follow me forever? Wait, I knew some names. "Is your name Clara Iger?" I said. That had been the first owner's first wife's name. The ghost bared its teeth and lunged at the glass. I spun in my chair to see if she was behind me, but there was nothing there. I whipped back and around toward the mirror, and all of a sudden loud knocks sounded all around the closet. I flinched and glanced at the door, but the knocking wasn't coming from the parlor. It was coming from the back wall, the side walls, and the ceiling. Bang, bang, bang. Each bang seemed louder. Bang, bang, bang. My mother called my name, but someone said something to her and she fell quiet. The knocking stopped and I sat there frozen. The eerie quiet stretching out as I waited for more knocks was almost as unsettling as the knocks. When no more knocks came, I looked back into the mirror. Meeting the hollows where her eyes should be was as terrifying as ever, but I forced myself to go on with the procedure. "Is your name Theodora Iger?" I tensed, fearing her response to the wrong name, but her mouth bent into a smile and she nodded. I pressed a shaky hand to my racing heart. Thank God, now we knew who she was, but how did someone who couldn't talk tell me what she wanted? I sucked in a ragged breath, scared to say the wrong thing, but knowing I had to ask. "What do you need from me?" Her mouth moved, but again there was no sound. I got tears in my eyes, part fear, part frustration. She raised a claw-like hand and extended it toward me. At first, I thought she wanted me to give her something, but then I realized she was pointing. Was she pointing at me? What did that mean? "Me?" I asked. She shook her head, pulling her hand back, then stabbing it forward again. This time I saw she was actually pointing at the wall. Before I could turn to look, she disappeared. The banging started again. Bang, bang, bang. But this time, instead of being all over the closet, the banging seemed to come from one particular spot. I stood up and took the candle closer to where the bangs were centered and saw there was a tiny line going from where the support for an upper shelf would have been, though the shelf itself had obviously been taken out, probably so a taller person wouldn't hit their head, all the way down to the floor, and about 2 feet away was another line running parallel to the first. Was it a secret compartment? I turned back to the mirror to see the woman. She nodded and disappeared. As soon as she did, the door to the closet popped open part way, only to hit Sam, who had apparently been standing behind it. He rubbed his forehead and stepped away, pocketing a screwdriver. He opened his mouth to say something, but my mother brushed past him to hug me. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded shakily, the adrenaline still buzzing through me, but quickly told them all what had happened and pointed to the seams I'd seen. Sam had apparently brought more than a screwdriver in, because he brandished a hammer, and one of the investigators directed an enormous flashlight inside the closet for him. He rapped on the area with the seams as well as the wall on the other side for comparison, and it very obviously sounded hollow. Wasting no time, he swung the hammer into the wall and revealed a small space. "I had no idea this was here," he said. "It's not on the plans." A couple guys moved forward and, along with Sam, wrenched the panel away from the wall. Inside the wall was a small hat box full of letters. Sam brought the letters out and said some of the letters were to Theodora and some were to a man named Augustus de Wolf. From what we could tell, Theodore had been engaged to Augustus, but he was killed during the Civil War. All the letters were on heavy paper with beautiful looping handwriting, except one small sheet at the very bottom, which my mother read aloud for us all. "Darling Augustus, I fear I am going to meet you tonight. Francis has gone too far this time in his rage and knocked me down the stairs. I can feel the baby coming early, and there is too much blood. I already feel the room cloaked in darkness and my head weighed down. Though I know I will soon see your precious face, I regret my child, if it survives, will grow up without a mother. I doubt Francis will see justice for what he has done, but I will have my maid hide this missive in my hiding place with our correspondence, and when the time is right, take it to someone who can bring him to account. I will look for you. With adoration, your Theodora." The silence in the room felt heavy as we processed the letter. Francis Iger's second wife hadn't died in childbirth. She had been abused by him, and it seemed not for the first time, and this last time had brought on premature birth and killed her. Francis Iger was a murderer. Sam stood up. "I can't believe this." He ran his hands through his hair. "This is big. I should tell the news or something." I nodded. This must have been what she wanted, for people to know how she died. The investigators were all talking at once now, clearly thrilled at what had transpired and eager to see what the rest of the night brought. I was wrung out from everything, and my mom, Hunter, Moira, and I gathered our things and headed toward the door as the other group moved to the back of the house. My brother practically sprinted out the door, my mom and Moira right behind. I hesitated at the door frame before I could step onto the porch. Something was nagging at me. I couldn't help thinking there was something I forgot. Moira called to me and I shrugged. How important could it be? But as my foot cleared the doorway, it came to me. "Theodora, I hope getting your story out gives you peace and you move on to be with Augustus. But if not, I don't give you or any other spirit permission to follow me." With that, I pulled the door closed behind me. When I got to the car, I discovered Hunter had called shotgun, and I slid into the seat behind him. As we drove away, I couldn't help looking back at the house. And there, in the attic window, stood a woman in white. What did you think of today's story? Anything ever follow you home? Thanks for listening. Please drop us a like and subscribe. In the following days, look for more stories, both true and fictional, and explorations of all things creepy and unexplained. If you have a story to share, drop an email to the address in the description. Until next time, think twice before you look behind you in the mirror. There may be something on the other side.